On today's Babel, troubleshooting techniques, what it's designed to do versus what it can do.
This is Tech No Babble, your weekly source for church video and graphics news, perspectives, tips, and tricks. And now here's your host, Paul Clifford.
Hi, and welcome again to another episode of Tech No Babble. This is the show where every week I help you with video and graphic design for the church. My name is Paul Allen Clifford. I'm your host, and I'd love for you to ask your questions, leave your comments, etc. So just do that below the video. Now, if you're listening to the audio, you might notice there's no video because you're listening to the audio. So what I want you to do in that case is just head over to trinitydigitalmedia.com/TNB for Tech No Babble and leave your comment there on this show or just wherever it seems appropriate. So we're just a couple of shows from done with the troubleshooting series, and it occurred to me that sometimes we run into a problem where either the thing that we're using wasn't designed to do what we want it to, or it was designed, it has some capabilities that perhaps are on the periphery. So I thought that we would talk just a little bit about that and how that affects your troubleshooting. So, for example, when it comes to HDMI, HDMI is a video standard that with high definition television nearly every device has nowadays. It used to be that the only way to get HD into a television was with component, which is an analog standard, but then they added HDMI. Now, for connecting a Blu-ray player to your television, HDMI is wonderful. For connecting an Apple TV to a television, HDMI is wonderful. The problem comes when you want to do something outside of the norm. So let's talk about that just a little bit. HDMI was designed, this is what it was designed to do, to go up to 10 meters. Now, if you're American like I am, 10 meters doesn't mean a lot, but a meter is just a little bit longer than a yard, so that works out to be about 33 feet. So, 33 feet. Now, I want you to look in your church where you would put a computer and where the projector is and see if the entire distance between those two is less than or greater than 33 feet. Do you see that? So don't forget to include the cable run links between your computer under the floor or up a wall or wherever it is along the ceiling and then back down to your projector. All of a sudden that 33 feet, even if it's straight line, let's say 30 feet, you are actually probably running more like 60 feet, 15 feet up the ceiling, 15 feet down, something like that. So before long you run into a problem. It's just not designed to do this. So this is just one example of a situation where something isn't designed to do what you want it to do. We see this all the time with consumer electronics versus professional electronics. So your Blu-ray player at home hooks into your computer, hooks into your television, no problem. But let's say you want to take that to church and show a Blu-ray on the system there, but the system there is a professional system. So even though they're both HD, one has HDMI and one has SDI. So immediately you've got an incompatibility. You have to turn HDMI into SDI. Chances are, though, that's not the only incompatibility. Chances are you also need a gen-locked system. So you need the signal to be delayed in such a way that it starts drawing the frame at exactly the same point that your switcher starts drawing the frame. Gen lock. So in this case, you can get by these problems by adding in extra pieces of gear. But by adding in extra pieces of gear, you're also adding in extra layers of complexity. When you get to church, you add in all the extra gear, it doesn't work. Well, is it that your DVD player, your Blu-ray player didn't work? Probably not. It worked fine at home. If you take it back home, it'll probably work fine again. The problem is that you have a consumer piece of equipment going into a converter for a professional piece of equipment that then adds another piece to add in a capability that it was never designed to have. So when it comes to professional equipment versus consumer equipment, sometimes the difference between a consumer piece and a professional piece is a lot of money. And you start to think, well, that's a camera. This is a camera. Why do they cost so much different? Well, sometimes it's the rare thing that you only need in a professional environment. Sometimes it's saving you all the trouble of converting something that wasn't designed to do what you're asking it to do into something else. So as you're troubleshooting, as you're working on your system, I want you to consider, okay, on the negative side, what am I doing to this to make it do what it wasn't designed to do? Now, on the other side of the spectrum, sometimes pieces of gear are designed to do one thing, but they can do something else. So, perfect example, when I worked at the Whole House Audio Video Company, occasionally my boss would come out. We'd have a weekly training meeting, and he'd come out during that training meeting and he would say, okay guys, here's what we're going to do. We have a challenge. We need to take these pieces of gear and figure out a way to make them do this thing. So the reason that that was valuable is because occasionally we would have installers that would come in and they really didn't have the budget for what they had told the client it would do, so they had to try and make things work. Again, less than ideal. It's much better to get the right thing for the right situation, but they would try and figure out, okay, this doesn't work the way that I think that it should, so how do I get around that problem? So one example was we had a MP3 player. Now it was a rack-mounted 4-output big MP3 player. This was back a few years ago, so nowadays we just not worry about it, but back then that's what we had. So the challenge was to make that into a doorbell. Not what it was supposed to do, but could it do it? Well, yeah, you get a doorbell MP3, you put it on this thing, and then it had a command in it where you could say, hey, play this preset. So you also had to take that MP3 and associate it with the preset, and then take a controller, which we would assume that they had in this challenge, and have the button on the controller respond to a push button input. So you had to figure out how to make that work. So you press the doorbell button, that's a push button input. It sends a command to this MP3 player, which then plays this. And then you had to make sure all the amplifiers were on, everything was set to the correct source, all that. So it came about that once you work through all these things, it was absolutely possible to do it this way. Should someone have a problem where they absolutely needed to make this work or they didn't get paid, we could help them. But it turns out we had another piece, where if you just bought the other piece, that did it natively. So that's what I want you to consider, is that there are situations where you can stretch a piece of gear to make it work, and you have to. There are other situations where you can stretch a piece of gear and make it work, and by the time you buy all the adapters and spend all the work, you've actually put more money and effort into making something work than buying the correct piece of gear. As you're troubleshooting, figure out which situation you're in. Has someone made something work even though it's not designed to? Or do you need to make something work so that the system can work at least temporarily until you get things working better? Well, I hope that helped you. I hope that now you can start thinking through, okay, what can it do versus what is it designed to do, and do I have a situation where I'm wasting time and effort, or a situation where for a little more I can make it do more than it was maybe designed to do? If you like this content, you'd like my email newsletter, so head on over to trinitydigitalmedia.com/gifts, GIFTS, and pick up your church tech gift there, along with a free subscription to my email newsletter. Until next time, this is Paul Allen Clifford with trinitydigitalmedia.com. Go out and change eternity.